Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and imagine the distant echo of church bells fading into the evening air. The year is 1374, and the sun has just dipped below the horizon over a quiet English village. A gentle mist rolls in over the fields, and the last rays of golden light reflect off thatched rooftops, slowly giving way to the soft silver glow of moonlight. This is not a story of war or kings, not a tale of grand battles or royal crowns. This is the peaceful heartbeat of everyday life in medieval England, a world that moved slowly, breathed deeply, and found beauty in the ordinary. As we journey through this gentle world tonight, you won't need to worry about anything. There are no loud surprises here, no jarring sounds or harsh transitions, just a calm, soothing walk through the quiet corners of history. Tonight, you are not an outsider looking in. You are part of it, walking the same worn paths, hearing the same owls calling from distant trees, and feeling the same wooden floorboards creak beneath your feet. In the center of this village, small cottages sit clustered together like old friends huddled for warmth. Their walls are made of wattle and daub-woven twigs, covered with a mixture of clay, straw, and dung, yet they feel warm, lived in, and safe. Inside, candles flicker softly, casting slow-moving shadows on wooden beams. A low fire crackles gently in the hearth. The scent of stewed onions, leeks, and a hint of thyme still lingers in the air from the evening meal. Children are already tucked under rough woolen blankets, their breathing slow and even. The only sounds now are the distant hoot of an owl and the soft rustling of wind through the trees. Let's walk a little closer. Picture a young man named Edwin, an apprentice carpenter. He's just finished wiping down his tools and stacking them neatly beside the hearth. His hands are calloused but steady. He's proud of the table he finished earlier that day, simple, sturdy, and built to last. He doesn't need applause or recognition. There's quiet satisfaction in the craft, in knowing he's helped build something real. Across the lane, a woman named Maud kneels beside her daughter's bed, whispering a soft prayer. Her day began before the sun and was filled with spinning wool, tending to the garden, and baking bread. Her back aches, but her heart is full. Tomorrow, she do it all again. And in the rhythm of these days, there is peace, not the peace of stillness, but the peace of purpose. Now, we step back and let the village fade into the distance, holding on to its calm. The stars begin to emerge, one by one, in a sky so dark and vast it feels like velvet. There's no sound but the breeze and your breath, steady and soft. Let the stillness wrap around you like a blanket, and let your mind drift further into this world, a world where time moves slower, voices are softer, and life, though simple, is rich with meaning. You are safe here. This is your time to rest. The gentle hum of crickets rises with the night, blending seamlessly into the natural music of the countryside. The village rests under a soft sky, blanketed by stars and silence. Within these humble homes, sleep comes, not from exhaustion alone, but from a life deeply tied to nature's rhythm. No glowing screens or mechanical clocks break the stillness, only the moon and the sound of your own breath guiding the hours. In a nearby house, a candle still burns, low beside an old man named Thomas. His hands are worn, fingers bent from decades of working leather. He sharpens a thin blade with quiet precision, though his eyes grow heavier with each pass across the stone. Around him, leather straps, buckles, and unfinished belts lie in calm disarray. He has lived through seasons of good harvest and seasons of hardship, but now, in his later years, his only concern is finishing the belt for his grandson's coming, named Day, outside. The village dogs have curled beside doorways, tails twitching in dreams. Cats slink between fences and barns, their paws silent on the ground. The streets are empty now, except for the occasional clatter of a loose wooden shutter or the hoot of a sleepy barn owl. All things, even the smallest, settle down for the night. Not far away, the local church watches over the village like a silent guardian. Its stones are cold with age, each one laid by hands long gone. A single candle flickers behind the stained glass, where a monk prepares the altar for tomorrow's prayers. The echo of his footsteps is the only sound inside those ancient walls as he hums a soft hymn passed down for centuries. He is not in a rush. Nothing sacred is hurried. Back near the green, a soft wind rattles the thatching on one roof. Inside, a young mother sits beside her sleeping baby, gently rocking the cradle with her foot. The child makes a small sound, something between a sigh and a yawn, but does not wake. She watches, lost in thought. Perhaps she's thinking of the harvest, or of her husband who returns from market at dawn. Perhaps she is simply content in this quiet moment where love and peace live side by side. Each breath you take draws you deeper into this world. Your heartbeat slows, your thoughts grow still. The village sleeps, and you sleep with it safe, calm and wrapped in a silence that has lasted for hundreds of years. The earth turns slowly beneath you. The stars keep watch overhead. You are not alone. You are part of something old and beautiful. Let go now. Let the wind carry you deeper into this night. Let the past, gentle and patient, cradle your dreams. Asterisk, as the stars climb higher, the rhythm of night deepens. Midnight in a medieval village is not marked by clocks, but by instinct. Animals grow quieter, firelight fades, and dreams take hold. Sleep doesn't rush. It drifts in like fog across a field, soft and certain, in a timber-framed cottage on the edge of town. A young boy named Edwin stirs in his straw-stuffed bed. A thin blanket covers him, and above, the wooden beams creak gently with the changing air. The fire has long since dimmed to glowing coals. He doesn't wake, fully only shifts, dreaming of running through fields, chasing geese, or climbing apple trees just before the harvest. His small hand clutches a wooden carving of a knight, his only toy. His parents sleep just steps away. There are no separate bedrooms here. Privacy is not a concern, nor a concept. Life is shared. The same roof covers all. In the far corner of the room, their cow lies curled up beside the wall. It breathes slowly, its body adding warmth to the night air. Outside, the fields are still. The wheat waves gently under the touch of the breeze, as if the land itself breathes in sync with the people who till it. Owls drift silently overhead, scanning for mice, while foxes skulk near the hedges, their sharp eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. A little farther down the road, near the riverbank, a fisherman named Harold lies asleep beneath a heavy wool cloak. he has no house of his own. Instead, he finds shelter where he can under trees, inside barns, or in abandoned mills. Tonight, he sleeps beneath the open sky, back resting against the roots of a large oak. The distant splash of a fish briefly opens his eyes, but he smiles and closes them again. The river is alive, and it sings him to sleep. Somewhere near the center of the village, a baker prepares to rise soon. But for now, the oven is cold, the flour untouched. In just a few hours, he'll light the fire and begin kneading dough for the morning's bread. His world begins before most others stir, and yet even he rests now, arms across his chest, breathing slowly, the scent of smoke still lingering on his sleeves. Everything in this world is simple and yet sacred. Every sound has meaning. Every silence has weight. You are not just observing this past, you are drifting through it, embraced by its warmth, calmed by its honesty. Let your body relax. Let your thoughts melt into the rhythm of these peaceful lives. Nothing is rushed here. Everything follows. The steady flow of time, guided by moonlight and memory. The bells of the nearby abbey chime softly for long. Distant tolls through the misty night air. They do not startle, they soothe. In this quiet town, the monks rise for matins, their night prayers. It is the only movement now, cloaked in stillness. Candles flicker within the stone walls of the monastery as the monks' footsteps echo faintly. On the cold flagstones, these sacred hours belong to prayer and reflection. Cloaked in woolen robes, their heads bowed, the monks chant in Latin. Their voices float through the nave like low waves, rising and falling with peaceful repetition. No rush, no urgency, just quiet devotion in the presence of something eternal beyond the abbey. A watchman makes his rounds. His lantern swings at his side, casting a golden glow across the cobbled street. He hums to himself to stay awake, though his voice is low and gentle. He stops to look up at the stars. To him, each one is a sign of weather, of fate, of God's design. Then, quietly, he moves on, boots brushing the dust. Inside one of the houses near the square, an elderly woman dreams beside a sleeping cat curled against her chest. She is wrapped in thick linen and dreams not of the past, but of small joys, a harvest festival, fresh honey, her grandson's laughter. Her breathing is slow and rhythmic, and the creak of the wind outside does not disturb her. Time in this village is not broken into digital seconds, but into seasons, sunrises, and moon phases. The people rise with light and sleep with darkness. Life bends with nature, not against it. Even the buildings rest. The wood of the cottages expands and contracts with the moisture in the air. The thatch roofs cradle warmth beneath their layers. In the distance, a soft rain begins to fall, just a light tapping on the roof, like a lullaby from the sky. You, dear listener, are not a visitor. You are a dreamer, walking between timelines. Let your muscles soften, your breath deepen. Let this village lull you into peace. Every detail is here to slow your mind, to empty your worries, and to carry you into sleep like a boat on a quiet river in the gentle rhythm of medieval village life. One figure stood as the heartbeat of progress and survival, the village blacksmith. Far more than just a worker of metal, he was a craftsman, a problem solver, and a quiet force shaping everyday life. As dawn's light painted the sky in warm tones, the clanging of hammer on anvil echoed like a steady drumbeat, announcing the beginning of another productive day. His forge was often a central feature of the village, a place where warmth, light, and utility converged. Nestled near the edge of the main square or along a busy path, the smithy was instantly recognizable. Darkened walls from constant smoke, an open doorway revealing glowing coals, and the ever-present hiss of steam as red-hot metal met water. The blacksmith's role was diverse. He forged plowshares to till the land, horseshoes to keep hooves strong and sure, nails and hinges for the carpenters, locks and keys for security, and cooking tools for the home. Every tool used in the field, kitchen, or church bore his touch. It wasn't uncommon to see him crafting ornate iron gates for wealthier villagers or simpler, sturdy tools for the local farmer. Rich or poor, everyone relied on the blacksmith. In some way, children watched him with awe, eyes wide as sparks flew like fireflies under his skilled hand. For them, it seemed like magic. To adults, he was a vital support to their daily work. When tools broke or wagons faltered, it was the blacksmith who brought function back to form. His work didn't stop at creating. He repaired, reinforced, and even innovated. A bent scythe could be reshaped. A broken wheel bracket could be reforged stronger. Inside the forge, the atmosphere was thick with heat and focus. The bellows roared as they fed oxygen to the fire, lifting the flames to a white-hot blaze. The smith's hands, calloused and powerful, moved with deliberate control, gripping tongs, positioning the iron, striking with precision. Sweat clung to his brow, but he worked calmly, his rhythm uninterrupted. He was also something of a community figure, offering practical wisdom alongside his craft. Villagers often exchanged news and advice with him while waiting for their work. In a world where few could write, the blacksmith's memory served as a kind of oral ledger, recalling what needed fixing and who needed what. His trust was earned and respected. Training to become a blacksmith took years of apprenticeship. Boys who showed strength and discipline might begin as early as 12, learning to manage the bellows, sort metals, and eventually shape small items. Over time, they graduated to larger tasks, all under the guidance of a master smith. Patience, resilience, and creativity were essential traits. But beyond the work, there was also a rhythm to his life. He ate simple meals, often alone, due to his long hours, yet he wasn't isolated. Festival days brought laughter to the forge, and village celebrations often featured tools and decorative items he had created with care. Some blacksmiths even traveled to nearby towns, gaining extra coin or bartering their goods in marketplaces at night. When the flames died and the tools were hung back in their place, the forge fell silent. Yet the blacksmith's presence lingered. In the tools in every home, the hinges on every door, the horseshoes on every path, he was a quiet artisan of durability and purpose, whose strength lay not just in muscle, but in dedication and skill passed from hand to hand. As the first rays of sun slipped quietly through the wooden shutters of her cottage, the village weaver was already awake. Her work, both art and necessity, began early. The production of cloth that would clothe her neighbors, line their beds, or wrap their newborns. In a world before factories and machines, weaving was a daily act of care, craftsmanship, and quiet patience. The weaver's home was often filled with the soft thud of the loom, Wooden beams creaked gently as her hands moved in a slow and practiced rhythm, thread by thread, line by line. Her loom stood near the hearth or by a window, taking advantage of the morning light. Some weavers worked alone, others with family members, helping spinning thread, preparing wool, or organizing dyed yarn. Cloth was essential to every household. Tunics, cloaks, bedding, sacks, and even ceremonial items were all made by hand. Weavers crafted from wool, flax, and sometimes imported cotton for wealthier buyers. The process began with raw materials, shearing sheep, washing the wool, carding it to align the fibers, and spinning it into thread. It was only after hours of this preparation that the weaving could begin. Many villagers paid the weaver with goods or services rather than coin. A farmer might exchange grain for cloth. A carpenter might build her shelves in return for a strong woolen cloak. This barter system kept the weaver tied closely to the life and rhythm of the village. Her work was intimate. Each garment or sheet held the story of its owner, the occasion it was made for, and the hands that had touched it. Color was an important part of weaving. While some cloth remained undyed, others were tinted with natural substances. Indigo for blue, madder root for red, onion skins for yellow. The weaver learned the recipes from elders, boiling and soaking the threads with great care. Dyes varied by region, and local traditions shaped which colors were most common. The tools of the trade were simple but effective: hand spindles, combs, carders, and of course, the loom. Some looms were upright, others horizontal. Some took up half a room. Threads were arranged carefully on the warp, then interlaced with the weft. Mistakes had to be corrected immediately. One wrong pull could ruin a full day's work. Weaving was often considered women's work in rural villages, though men in towns and guilds also practiced the trade. In noble houses or monastic communities, weaving could be elevated to an art form with rich tapestries telling stories from scripture or legend. But in the villages, it was simple and practical: durable wool for winter, linen for undergarments, thick cloth sacks for storing grain. The weaver's day passed in quiet repetition, punctuated by breaks for meals or tending to children. Her hands rarely rested. Even in conversation, she might spin thread or sort wool. Her fingers bore the marks of her labor: dry skin, tiny calluses, the occasional cut from sharp thread ends or splinters. When a bolt of cloth was finally finished, it was measured, folded, and stored with care. A sense of pride came with every piece. She knew which family would wear it, which baby would be wrapped in it, or which couple would sleep under its threads. Her work was silent, slow, and largely unseen, but it clothed the village and held it together. Quite literally, in the evening, by candlelight, she might spin more thread or prepare the loom for the next day. Her world was small, but her impact was woven into every tunic, every curtain, every bedroll laid out beside the hearth. Her craft was not one of glory or fame, but of dedication, a quiet beauty in repetition, and a kind of gentle power in creating something both useful and enduring. As twilight settled and the household quieted, the last of the kitchen embers gave off a soft amber glow. Families gathered closer around the hearth, not just for warmth, but for comfort, stories, and prayers. The medieval evening was a time of unwinding. No buzzing lights, no distant traffic, only the subtle rhythm of nature. Outside, A light breeze would rustle thatch rooftops, while crickets began their nighttime chorus. In wealthier homes, perhaps a single candle burned dimly on a wooden table, casting long shadows on stone walls. But most peasants used only the fading firelight. Light was precious. It was reserved and respected. Inside these homes, simple rituals marked the transition from day to night. Fathers might recount tales of saints or long-past kings, and children would lie on straw bedding, heads nestled against sacks of dried herbs like lavender or sage, believed to ward off illness and bring restful dreams. Mothers would whisper gentle blessings, and in many cases, recite evening prayers passed down for generations. Despite their hardships, these moments provided emotional safety. There was a rhythm to it, all predictable, familiar, and strangely soothing. Sleep in the medieval era was often divided into two segments. People typically experienced what was called first sleep and second sleep. After going to bed shortly after dusk, they would naturally awaken a few hours later during the middle of the night. This in-between time was not viewed as insomnia, but as a sacred window. Some would use it to pray, reflect, stoke the fire, or simply talk with their spouse. Then, they'd naturally drift back into their second sleep until sunrise. This rhythm aligned with the body's natural cycles, untethered from artificial lighting or modern distractions. For those in monasteries, evening routines followed even more structure. Monks lived by the bell. As night fell, they attended the final prayer of the day. Their chants echoed through cold stone halls, a soothing harmony in the darkness. Afterward, strict silence was observed until morning. The sleep chambers, known as dormitories, were simple, often shared and austere. Yet, within them, peace settled thick, like the winter fog, across both peasant cottages and stone abbeys. The concept of rest was communal. People slept in groups, siblings huddled together for warmth. Families shared beds, and privacy was rare. But this closeness added to the sense of security. The world beyond the wooden door might be uncertain, filled with wolves, bandits, or illness, but inside, wrapped in blankets and kinship, sleep came gently. Nightfall in the medieval countryside brought not fear, but familiarity. While today, we fear the absence of light, medieval people accepted darkness as a natural phase of life. There were no neon signs, no street lamps, no hum of electricity, just the soft silver of moonlight and the flicker of distant hearths. Sleep wasn't something to fight or delay. It arrived gradually, welcomed like an old friend. In small villages, it was common for neighbors to say goodnight with a nod or soft word as they latched their wooden doors. The quiet that followed wasn't empty, it was full of tiny sounds. The creaking of beams, the rustling of hay in the loft, a far-off dog barking once, then nothing. For people living in tight quarters, silence held meaning. It meant safety, rest, and the presence of others close by. Before bed, many families shared a simple drink, perhaps warm ale or watered-down wine. In some regions, people drank posset, a mixture of milk, honey, and herbs, to ease digestion and help them sleep. These warm concoctions, passed from hand to hand in pottery cups, signaled the closing of the day. They weren't indulgences. They were necessities, rituals shaped by need and tradition. Houses smelled of earth and smoke. Floors were often dirt, and bedding was layered straw or wool-stuffed sacks. Beds were sometimes just wooden platforms or rope frames that had to be tightened regularly, hence the phrase, "sleep tight." The phrase had real meaning. Loose ropes meant sagging support. Good sleep depended on well-pulled knots and softened straw. Clothing doubled as sleepwear. Most peasants slept in their undertunics or basic linen garments. Wealthier folk might have separate nightshirts or even light caps to retain heat. But across all classes, comfort was defined by warmth, stillness, and the gentle heaviness of fatigue. In the moments before first sleep, it was common to reflect quietly or speak softly with loved ones. Couples discussed the day, children listened to whispered fables, and elders gave quiet reminders of next day's tasks. It was a time for connection, not distraction. Even the animals played their part. Shared quarters, their breathing rhythmic and slow. Chickens roosted in silence, cats curled in corners, dogs slept close to doors. This closeness to animals wasn't unusual, it was practical. Body heat helped warm shared spaces, and the presence of livestock gave a sense of completeness to the night. And outside, the natural world continued its quiet dance. Owls glided through the trees, bats darted overhead, and foxes padded softly across frozen leaves. The stars, clearer and sharper than we see them today, glowed like ancient sentinels. By familiar sounds, simple comforts, and the assurance that tomorrow would come as it always did, with the rooster's cry and the eastern glow. For many, the night was not a single stretch of uninterrupted rest. Instead, sleep often came in two phases: first sleep and second sleep. After going to bed soon after sundown, people would sleep deeply for several hours. Then, around midnight, they would wake not with frustration, but with purpose. This interlude was known and expected. During this midnight hour, some would pray or meditate, others might stoke the fire or tend to animals. In villages, neighbors sometimes visited one another. Quiet conversations, shared stories, or even simple tasks like spinning wool were common. It was a peaceful, contemplative time, not a disturbance, but a rhythm the body followed. Religious households used this time for devotion. Monks and nuns, bound by strict prayer schedules, often rose in the middle of the night for vigils. In monasteries, bells would ring softly to summon the faithful to candlelit chapels. These prayers were not hurried. They were sung, chanted, or whispered in Latin, each word echoing in cold stone halls. Even among lay people, a brief prayer to ward off nightmares or offer thanks for safety was typical during this waking interval. As the night wore on, people naturally returned to bed for second sleep. This phase was lighter, often filled with dreams. It carried them gently toward the first hints of dawn. There was no alarm clock. The sounds of roosters, stirring animals, and the slow brightening of the sky signaled it was time to rise. Children, tucked beside parents or siblings, often stirred last. Their sleep was the deepest, undisturbed by the small routines of adults. In wealthier homes, servants might begin to light fires or prepare morning tasks while their masters still rested. For those in cities, night held more hazards. Narrow alleys, absent lighting, and the threat of crime made movement after dark risky. Still, in close-knit neighborhoods, there was a sense of mutual protection. Watchmen patrolled with lanterns and staves, calling the hour aloud. Their voices reassured listeners, 3 o'clock and all's well. To further ensure safety, doors were bolted with iron bars and windows were shuttered tightly. In some towns, curfews were enforced to extinguish fires and remain indoors. Violators might be fined or questioned by local guards. Despite these concerns, the medieval night was not filled with dread, was respected. People feared spirits, yes, and tales of ghosts or demons were passed from mouth to ear. But protections existed, charms, holy symbols, and spoken blessings offered spiritual defense. Sleep was not a battle. It was a retreat, sacred pause before the demands of dawn. The pace of life then did not demand urgency. Rest was woven into daily existence, not carved out of it. The body and the world were in quiet agreement. After sunset, it was time to pause, reflect, and let the mind drift. The medieval night wasn't just darkness, it was a canvas for silence, for dreams, for safety in simplicity. Wrapped in wool, guarded by prayer, and surrounded by familiar sounds, people surrendered to sleep with trust. It was a different world than ours, but in that world, night carried a peace we often forget exists. In the countryside, where torches and candles were precious and firewood was rationed with care, the darkness of night stretched vast and quiet. The stars above were not obscured by city light or noise. They were companions to the villagers and farmers who stared upward before turning in. Many knew the constellations, not by their Greek names, but through local lore stars that formed the plowman's hook or the shepherd's ladder. These lights in the heavens helped tell time and season, and served as gentle reminders that life moved in cycles. Before bed, families might gather for a final moment together. In homes of 1 or 2 rooms, everyone, parents, children, and sometimes even farmhands, shared the same space. A candle might flicker in the corner as someone told a short tale or repeated a proverb. These weren't elaborate stories, just quiet moments passed between generations. Lessons were spoken with simplicity. Don't whistle after dark, lest you call the wind spirits, or the fox walks silent when the moon is full. Animals settled too. Dogs curled near the hearth, while chickens clucked once or twice before tucking their heads beneath their wings. Livestock, sheltered in sheds or adjacent rooms, shifted softly on straw. Their warmth often helped heat the space. The sounds of snorting pigs or lowing cows were not distractions. They were signs that all was well. Night clothing, if owned, was simple. A linen shirt or woolen gown served for sleeping. In colder months, straw mattresses were piled with furs, cloaks, and patched blankets. In many homes, a hot stone wrapped in cloth might be placed under the covers, warmed earlier in the hearth. These were humble comforts, but in their stillness, they brought deep rest. Sleep didn't mean escape from responsibility. Some woke in the middle of the night to check the embers in the fire or ensure that no animal had strayed. In winter, drifting snow could pile against the door. It had to be cleared even before sunrise. Mothers might rise to quiet a crying child, and farmers would sometimes listen intently for the howl of wolves or the distant rumble of a storm. Yet, even with these small disturbances, the tone of the night remained consistent, soft, cautious, careful. The world slowed, the mind softened, hearts beat in rhythm with creaking wood and sighing wind. These were nights untouched by clocks, deadlines, or machines, no buzzing phones, no headlines, only darkness and silence. In wealthier manners, sleep was also ritualized. Bedchambers were large, often curtained to trap warmth. Servants prepared the bed by warming sheets and ensuring the room was sealed from drafts. Lords and ladies might read by candlelight or be read to. Religious devotion was common, reciting psalms, offering thanks, or meditating on dreams and signs. Sleep, especially among the educated or the devout, was believed to offer divine messages. Even nightmares were interpreted. Dreams of wolves or falling often had spiritual meaning. A priest might be consulted if dreams repeated or disturbed someone too deeply. But for most, dreams were private, a flickering world lived in silence. When finally the body rested, it did so fully. Muscles loosened, the day's aches faded, and even if the straw poked or the wind whistled through the boards, sleep wrapped around the body like wool. And so, hour by hour, the medieval world slept not with perfection, but with intention. The night was not something to survive. It was something to embrace. Its calm was not artificial, it came from within. Peace wasn't created, it was allowed. Morning was still far away, but the rhythm of night continued in waves. Medieval sleep didn't always follow a single long stretch. Instead, it often came in two parts, separated by a period of quiet wakefulness, known today as segmented sleep. This wasn't considered a problem, it was natural. After the first sleep, many would wake for a while, maybe for an hour or two. They wouldn't panic or fight it. They would pray, think, or simply rest in silence. Some couples used this peaceful window to talk softly or be intimate. Others might get up briefly to stoke the fire, check on livestock, or walk outside to feel the coolness of the night. It was a moment of peace and reflection, not worry. Then came the second sleep, a deep rest that would carry people into the early morning. When the rooster crowed or the eastern sky lightened, sleep would lift gently, not with the jolt of an alarm, but with the natural rhythm of dawn. This pattern was accepted and understood. Monks who lived by bells and schedules followed even stricter nightly routines. In monasteries, sleep was broken by the call to prayer matins or nocturnes, usually in the middle of the night. They would rise in candlelight, chant psalms in cold stone chapels, then return to bed. Even among common folk, segmented sleep was deeply woven into life. There was no shame in waking in the night. It was not seen as restlessness. It was part of being human. The concept of midnight being haunted or fearful only grew later with folklore and superstition. But for most medieval people, midnight was simply a hinge between two halves of rest. The houses around the village, wooden, thatched, or even partially built into the earth, remained dark. If anyone passed by at night, it was likely a watchman, a priest called to a deathbed, or a traveler seeking shelter. But most people stayed indoors. The risks outside weren't just wolves or thieves falling into a ditch, getting lost, or encountering something unnatural was enough to keep people close to their hearth. The hearth itself, even at night, was sacred. Embers were banked with ash to keep them smoldering till morning. The fire was not just warmth, it was protection, life, and light. Letting the fire die out completely was seen as careless. Each morning, it would be revived from those glowing coals, just as the day revived the sleepers in castles and great houses torches might be left burning low. Guards patrolled walls and courtyards, not just for enemy threats, but for internal safety fires, servants or drunken guests. Yet even there, the night was quiet. Stone walls muffled sound, tapestries hung thick to block drafts, and the deep silence of medieval darkness was absolute. The most fortunate rooms had windows' tiny slits or covered holes, but even then, no glass. Only wooden shutters or animal skin covers. Outside, the wind moaned through trees and over roofs. Inside, everything slept under its cover. The silence of the night was full, not empty. It carried sounds the day smothered, the rustling of mice in the rafters, the cracking of wood as beams settled, the far-off bark of a dog. Each sound had a place, each had meaning, and over time, these became normala, part of sleep, not a disruption. Some people, especially older ones, whispered simple prayers during these quiet hours. Keep me safe through the night, O Lord, or let no shadow take me, for the light returns. Faith and fear mingled softly, but above all, there was a trust in the return of morning. Darkness was not an enemy, was a companion, and so the night continued, slowly, gently, with deep breaths, quiet dreams, and a world resting not in electricity or noise, but in patience, simplicity, and the lull of the earth itself. As the second half of the night wore on, most villagers had returned to slumber after their natural wakeful pause. The silence deepened further. The moon, if present, hung higher in the sky, bathing the world in a gentle glow. Even the owls, who had called softly earlier, grew still. The quiet was not empty, it was rich and textured, filled with the kind of peace only true darkness and distance from modern life could provide. Inside a humble peasant's cottage, the sleeping arrangements were modest but meaningful. The family slept close together, sometimes all in the same room. Parents on a straw-filled mattress or pallet, with the youngest children curled beside them, and older ones nearby on simple cots or blankets. Proximity wasn't just a matter of love, it was warmth. In winters, especially, human heat was the best defense against the cold stone or earthen floor. Beneath woolen blankets and furs, wrapped in simple linen shifts or night tunics, people lay still. There was no tossing and turning from screen-induced anxiety or the noise of a restless city. No flashing lights outside, no honking cars, no glowing devices. Just the heartbeat of the house, the slow breathing of those inside it, and the subtle whisper of wind outside. And in dreams in the medieval world were held sacred. Some believed dreams were messages from God or signs from saints. Others thought them to be nonsense, stirred by heavy food or bad air. But regardless of belief, dreams were remembered, recounted by firelight the next morning, or whispered privately in prayer. A strange figure in a dream or a visit from a deceased relative could be cause for reflection, or even a trip to the village priest. In monasteries, dreams were considered part of the spiritual struggle, warnings, temptations, or calls to purity. Monks wrote down vivid ones in journals, wondering what they meant. And among ordinary folk, dreams could even be used to explain strange behavior or predict the future. Still, most sleep was deep, clean, and natural. Not every person dreamed every night, but the comfort of true rest was common. People fell asleep, not staring at a clock, but guided by nature's cues. The darkening sky, the quieting of the animals, and the cooling of the hearth told them when it was time. Back outside, the village slept under a sky full of stars. In cities, where fires and lamps still glowed, the stars were fainter. In rural places, the heavens stretched wide, vast, and brilliant. Even the Milky Way was visible, and many saw patterns and omens in the stars. Astrology was taken seriously, not just by nobles, but by farmers who looked to the skies for planting seasons and weather signs. The village dogs no longer barked. The sheep in pens were still. The watchman leaned quietly against a post, his torch low, his eyes heavy. His job was to stay alert, but even he could not help feeling the pull of sleep. Only the castle guards, higher up and more disciplined, continued their round, swords at side, listening for anything strange in the air. In the deepest hour before dawn, even the ghosts of one believed in them kept to themselves. Folktales spoke of spirits wandering between midnight and cockcrow, but inside homes protected by crosses, charms, and prayers, people trusted they were safe. Superstition existed, but it did not rule. Faith in God and in the rising sun kept fear in check. Then, slowly, a faint light began to creep into the eastern sky. The edge of night softened. It was not a sudden thing, but like a breath held long now being released. Shadows remained, but the stars began to fade. The black sky turned to deep navy, then purple. A new day was beginning, but for now, sleep still held most hearts gently. The village remained quiet, wrapped in its final moments of rest. In less than an hour, roosters would crow, the fires would be stirred, mothers would rise to fetch water, fathers would check the animals. But in this fleeting moment, the last hush before dawn, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Suspended in peace, *S, the sky lightened gradually, the rhythm of the medieval world prepared to awaken once more. But in these few remaining minutes before full dawn, a peculiar stillness reigned, a sacred limbo between night and morning. This transitional space was considered by many in the medieval world as a moment of divine clarity, a time when prayers whispered might rise more easily to heaven. Inside monasteries, a few monks stirred. The sound of sandals against stone echoed softly in the cloister. A bell was about to ring for matins, the early morning prayer service. While the rest of the world still slept, these devout men had already risen, wrapped in robes against the morning chill, faces solemn and serene. Candles flickered in the chapel, casting golden halos on the ancient stone walls. Their chants, Gregorian and softwood, soon filled the air. These weren't songs for performance, but for devotion. The repetition and slow tempo created a hypnotic calm, one that could easily lull a listener back into sleep. For the average villager who might pass near a monastery or church at this hour, the sound of matins was comforting, like knowing that someone, somewhere, was awake and praying for all. Meanwhile, back in the countryside, the farmers' cottages remained still. Perhaps one or two early risers, stirred by habit or the need to prepare for market, rubbed their eyes and pulled on rough woolen tunics, but most continued to rest. Even animals, which often woke with the sun, remained calm. The roosters had not yet announced the day. The chickens were tucked under straw in the coops. The cows breathed quietly in their stalls. Sleep in this era wasn't rushed. There was no alarm clock, no pressure to maximize every hour. The medieval mind saw time differently, not in minutes and seconds, but in seasons, bells, and sunlight. There was a deep, internal rhythm to life, one that mirrored the natural world. That rhythm shaped sleep. People rose and rested with the sun, and though work was hard, rest was honored. For the nobility, sleep was a bit more luxurious. Feather mattresses, canopies to keep out drafts, and servants to stoke the fire meant they could rest in relative comfort. Yet even lords and ladies lived without modern distractions. A noblewoman might drift off remembering a hymn or a passage from scripture. A knight might dream of a hunt or a past battle, and even the wealthiest among them could be awoken by a storm, a distant howl, or the creaking of ancient timbers. Folklore tells us of those who roamed at night watchmen, travelers delayed on the road, or the occasional midwife called urgently to a birth. Such people knew the world in a way others didn't. They could describe how the trees swayed under starlight, how wolves howled in the distance, or how the dew formed on cobblestone streets before sunrise. In cities, the silence of the night was thinner. Taverns might still echo with laughter into the small hours. Candlelight glowed from high windows. The poor slept in alleyways or beneath carts, using cloaks or old sacks for cover. Night soil collectors began their rounds before the day began, clearing waste from the chamber pots of those too busy or too proud to do it themselves. And yet, even here, there was still sleep, still rest, still the deep human need to shut out the world and surrender to darkness, no matter one's station. All shared in this nightly ritual of renewal. Back in the countryside, the first birds began to sing, softly at first. A robin in a hedgerow, a blackbird on a fence post. Their calls marked the end of the deepest sleep. Soon after, the roosters would crone. That crow would ripple across villages and farms. But not just yet. The stars were nearly gone, yet not quite. The moon, pale now, lingered on the horizon. In this final minute before full morning, the world lay in perfect balance, and those still wrapped in sleep felt a peace untouched by worry, untouched by haste. In the medieval world, sleep was more than necessity, was a gift, a time when the soul could wander, the body could heal, and the mind could breathe in silence. It was a nightly retreat, not from duty, but into rest, into stillness, as the sun's first rays crept over the hills and rooftops, touching thatched straw and stone walls with gold. The village slowly stirred, but for that brief, magical moment, the last breath of night, everything was still perfect, with the golden light of dawn stretching across the countryside. Medieval England began to awaken slowly, gently, and with purpose. Sleep faded like a distant dream, replaced by the first murmur of movement. But before the clatter of carts or the lowing of cattle filled the air, the transition from night to day was calm, quiet, and deeply rooted in ritual. In most homes, especially those of farmers, the hearth was the first thing to be tended to. Embers from the night before, if properly banked, still glowed softly. A practiced hand stirred them gently, feeding them twigs and dried moss to revive the flame. There was no rush, only the quiet understanding that fire was life, warmth, and sustenance. Without it, the day could not begin. Children stirred beneath woolen blankets, not yet fully awake but aware of the warmth disappearing as someone moved from the bed. They blinked into the pale light streaming through cracks in wooden shutters. A rooster's crow in the distance would be the gentle alarm bell, followed soon by the groaning of wooden doors, the thump of boots on packed earth, and the sigh of the wind brushing through thatch. As villagers rose, they did not speak much. Early morning was a sacred space, one where the mind still lingered between dream and duty. Washing was brief, done with cold water from a bucket, a splash on the face, a quick wipe with a cloth, and the day was set into motion. For most, this quiet time was an inward moment, perhaps a whispered prayer, a thought for the weather, or a silent hope that the harvest would be kind. In towns, the streets began to pulse faintly with life, rise, kneading dough in silence. The scent of rising bread wafted into alleyways and courtyards, mingling with the chill of morning dew. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, a visual sign that the town had begun its slow awakening. Travelers at inns, if any had stayed the night, stirred from straw mattresses. Some groaned from long rides the day before. Others pulled on cloaks and boots, eager to cover ground before the roads grew crowded. Inns were often busiest at sunrise, horses to be saddled, grain to be paid for, debts to be tallied before departure. Elsewhere, in noble manors and castles, a different kind of morning unfolded. Servants moved like shadows, lighting fires in chambers, preparing hot water for washing, and fetching clothes for their lords and ladies. The upper class did not rise with the sun, but slightly after, yet their routines were no less structured. A noblewoman might be greeted by her handmaid with a simple "Good day, my lady," as she rubbed sleep from her eyes and reached for a shawl. Monasteries, already echoing with chants from earlier prayers, entered their period of daily labor. Monks would tend the gardens, copy manuscripts, or sweep stone corridors, all in near silence. Their lives were governed by bells, each ring marking not just time, but purpose. Even in work, there was peace, a steady rhythm that reflected the calm of nature itself. Despite class differences, there was a common thread in these early hours of respect for the quiet, for the transition. The medieval world didn't charge into the day. It unfolded into it like petals in morning light. There was an innate understanding that haste served no one. There would be time for toil, for talk, for trade, but not yet. Outside the village, far from the noise, shepherds checked their flocks. Fields shimmered with dew. Rabbits darted from burrows. A lone falcon circled above, watching the earth below. Everything moved, but nothing rushed. In these moments, a certain clarity settled over the land. People did not speak of it, perhaps. They didn't even realize it, but there was a sense of belonging, of being a small part of a greater order. The stars had faded, the sun had risen, and life went on just as it always had. Children began to laugh, chasing chickens or each other. Mothers called them inside for simple meals, oats, leftover bread, maybe a boiled egg if fortune smiled. Fathers tightened belts and pulled on cloaks, readying for long days in the fields or market. And as the sun climbed higher, the night's final shadow slipped away, leaving behind only warmth, motion, and memory. Yet even now, the peace of the night lingered faintly, like a soft scent or a fading song. It would remain tucked away in the soul until it was summoned again that evening, when firelight returned and sleep reclaimed the land once more. as the sun dipped behind the rolling hills of the English countryside. A golden glow would linger briefly before darkness blanketed the land. The air turned cooler, and families retreated indoors, gathering around their hearths. These humble fireplaces, more than just sources of warmth, became the heart of the medieval evening. Flickering firelight cast dancing shadows across stone walls, creating a mystical atmosphere. Children huddled close to their elders, eyes wide with wonder. This was the time for storytelling, when oral tradition carried history, and old uncles would recount tales of knights and dragons, saints and sinners. Some stories were true, many imagined, but all held a purpose, whether to teach, entertain, or keep little ones wary of venturing too far after dark. Tales of ghosts in the woods and creatures lurking near the wells weren't uncommon. Superstition thrived in the minds of those who lived without modern explanations. Songs often followed stories. Simple folk tunes, passed from voice to voice, echoed the rhythms of daily life. Harvest songs, love ballads, and even humorous rhymes about village life. Sometimes a traveler might offer a new verse or a foreign melody, sparking fascination. Instruments were rare but cherished, flutes made from reeds, a lyre if one was lucky, or the tapping of spoons and feet. These moments were deeply bonding. There were no clocks, no screens, only the human voice and imagination. The hearth wasn't just the center of the home. It was the center of the community's emotional life. Young ones learned values, here patience, courage, the difference between right and wrong. The darkness outside grew heavier, punctuated by the howling of wolves or the hoot of an owl. The fire crackled, and while some stayed awake to hear just one more story, many found themselves drifting to sleep beside the warm glow, the last words of a tale lingering in their minds. In these peaceful yet powerful evenings, medieval families built memories, shared wisdom, and preserved culture, quietly shaping the soul of their time. As the last ember in the hearth faded and stories melted into dreams, the village outside settled into a deep, encompassing stillness. Midnight in medieval England wasn't just quiet, it was sacred. The world slowed to a near halt, wrapped in the thick silence of slumber and shadow. Stone cottages, barns, and chapels stood like sleeping giants beneath the blanket of night. The wind no longer whispered through the trees, it held its breath. The dirt roads, once trodden by cartwheels and barefoot children, lay empty and untouched. Even the animals, who had contributed their own noises during the day, now rested. The chickens huddled in their coops, cows lay still in hay-filled barns, and the watchful dogs curled up near doors, occasionally lifting their heads to distant sounds before settling again. But it wasn't absolute silence. Far from it, the night had its own musica, soft, ambient hum, composed by the countryside. An owl's distant call, low and questioning, often marked the passing of midnight. Crickets chirped in rhythmic unison in fields beyond the walls, and every now and then a fox's sharp bark broke the calm before disappearing once more into the dark. Somewhere, a church bell might toll the hour, its single, solemn note floating over rooftops and through alleys, a gentle reminder of time still turning. In wealthier manors, a servant might stoke a dying fire or shift beneath a thin blanket. In peasant homes, a baby might fuss in its mother's arms, only to be soothed by quiet humming. The villagers didn't fear the night, but they respected it. It belonged to dreams, to spirits, to God. Night prayers were often whispered in bed, simple pleas for safety and warmth until morning light returned. "Deliver us from evil," they'd murmur. Trusting in their faith, the moon cast silver light over the meadows, the riverbanks, and the darkened forest. Trees swayed slowly, like ancient guardians keeping watch. For travelers on the road rare, at this hour, the world felt both endless and intimate, with every footstep echoing far too loudly. And yet, despite the absence of human voices, there was peace in this silence. A rare kind of peace only found when the world has agreed to pause, to rest. It was in these hours, cradled in stillness, that the soul could truly breathe, though most of the village slept peacefully beneath the stars. Not every soul was allowed the comfort of slumber. As midnight passed and the night deepened, a few watchful eyes remained open-bound to guard the sleeping world from the threats of darkness. These were the night guards, sometimes assigned by local lords, other times simply volunteers from among the villagers. In smaller hamlets, a lone figure would suffice, clad in a heavy wool cloak, with a lantern in one hand and a staff or spear in the other. He would slowly patrol the boundary of the village, boots pressing softly against the packed earth. Their role was simple but vital. They listened. They watched. They made sure no doors had been left open, no livestock had escaped, and no suspicious movement stirred at the edges of the fields or forest. Larger towns or market centers had more formal watchmen sworn to walk, their routes in pairs, checking gates, alleys, and sometimes peering into the misty spaces between homes. They would call the hour, whispering the time like clockwork priests, reminding all who might be awake that the village remained under vigilant care. 2 hours past midnight. All is well. They rarely had to act. Crime was uncommon, and most threats came from nature fires, storms, or the occasional desperate thief. But when they did respond, it was often swift and direct, waking the bailiff, calling out for help, or lighting the warning torch at the village center. Sometimes their minds wandered. What stirred in the woods tonight? Were those rustling branches caused by wind or something more sinister? The line between the physical world and the spiritual felt thinner at night. Many whispered of ghosts, fairies, or wandering spirits, and it wasn't unheard of for even the bravest watchman to carry a cross or a charm carved with runes dot above them. The stars watched too. Orion stood tall in the heavens, his belt gleaming over the rooftops like a silent sentinel. The moon would shift slowly from east to west, casting long, creeping shadows that moved with time. And then, in the quietest moments, the guard would stop, breathe deeply, and listen, not just for danger, but for the harmony of a village resting. Snoring behind walls, the sigh of animals, the distant hoot of an owl. It reminded him why he was there. By protecting this calm, he preserved the dignity of the night. His role was not heroic in the tales told at the tavern, but it was noble in the hearts of the villagers. They slept because he stayed awake, and when the first cold light of dawn finally touched the rooftops, he would lower his lantern, nod to himself, and walk home in silence, just as unseen and unthanked the night he had guarded. Within each modest home, where the scent of burning wood mingled with dried herbs and earth. Children lay wrapped in scratchy wool blankets or beneath thin sheets of linen, depending on the family's means. Their beds were often shared siblings, huddled close for warmth and stuffed with straw or hay. If the household was lucky, a layer of feathers or old cloth softened the surface. Sleep came easily to the young, who spent their days in physical toil and playful curiosity, from helping with farm chores to chasing chickens in the courtyard, or carrying baskets of vegetables. Their small bodies craved rest once night fell. Their dreams were gentle. They drifted to faraway castles where they were knights or maidens, riding horses and dancing at feasts. They dreamed of endless fields, talking animals, or magical forests where no one shouted, no one worked, and bread grew on trees. These fantasies were sometimes shared by candlelight before sleep, told in whispers from older siblings or visiting grandmothers in the safety of the night. They forgot about the aching feet, the stings from nettles, the cuts from gathering firewood. The dark could be scary, yes, but the familiar sounds of snoring parents, the rustling of the hearth fire, or the soft nudge of a sleeping brother's foot were comforting reminders that they were not alone. Sometimes parents hummed lullabies, passed down through generations. No instruments, just a mother's voice, barely louder than the wind. The lyrics often spoke of stars, of the Virgin Mary, or of brave children who fell asleep quickly and woke to beautiful mornings. For orphans or children of the poor, sleep came on cold floors or straw piles in corners. Even in discomfort, exhaustion overcame them. Their dreams were not always sweet, but even they found brief escapes in imagined worlds brighter than the one they knew. When one child woke in the middle of the night, perhaps from a nightmare or a sudden chill, they would reach out instinctively. The familiar warmth of a sibling or the soft fur of the family dog curled nearby. That simple touch was enough to calm their breath and guide them back into sleep's arms. Unlike adults who feared the unknown of night, children found wonder in it. The shadows were not monsters, but mysterious stories. The creaks of the home were not warnings, but reminders that their world was alive even when asleep. And so, in every village and cottage, the children of medieval England dreamed peacefully beneath thatched roofs, innocent to the burdens of war, politics, and famine. They lay suspended in time, curled into straw nests, waiting for morning light to call them back into the day. While villages slept and wind rustled through the trees, not every soul was resting. In stone monasteries built on lonely hills or beside winding rivers, monks rose from their beds at midnight. The bell tower echoed across the cold silence, its deep sound reminding the faithful of their sacred duty. These were the hours of Matenza, midnight prayer observed with discipline. Monks lived not by the rhythms of the sun, but by the structure of time divided by devotion. Their lives were ruled by the rule of Saint Benedict, which called them to rise before dawn to sing praises, regardless of season or weather. Slowly, they would rise from their straw-filled pallets, not uttering a word. Silence was a sacred practice. In dim corridors, lit by flickering candles, they moved in long robes and hooded habits, forming quiet lines toward the chapel. Inside, stone walls held centuries of chants. The monks took their places in the cold choir stalls, breath visible in the air during winter. No fires were allowed in these holy spaces. Instead, the warmth came from within, from repetition, from unity, and from faith. The prayers were sung. In Latin, deep voices echoed like wind through caves, slow and deliberate, lifting ancient psalms toward heaven. The melodies were Gregorian, simple but powerful, designed to clear the mind and focus the soul. After matins, there was sometimes a brief return to sleep before lauds, the next prayer. But for some monks, the momentum of prayer kept them awake. They would retreat into their cells for silent reflection, scriptural reading, or quiet contemplation of the divine. These nightly vigils reminded them that the world was not theirs to control. In the darkest hours, while kings and peasants lay dreaming, the monks were awake, for all of them guardians of prayer, whispering between time and eternity. Their discipline shaped the rhythm of the medieval night. In every monastery, whether grand or modest, time was measured not in hours, but in hymns. Bells marked the holy cycle: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Even as the wind howled outside thick stone walls, the sacred voices within remained steady. The world might have changed beyond the cloister, but inside, time had paused. It was still the age of, even as the wind howled outside thick stone walls, the sacred voices within remained steady. The world might have changed beyond the cloister, but inside, time had paused. It was still the age of faith. To hear a monk's prayer at midnight was to feel the depth of medieval silence. It wasn't an emptiness, but a stillness filled with purpose, a quiet not of sleep, but of sacred watchfulness. As night deepened over the thatched rooftops of medieval villages, a calm began to settle. Families gathered around the hearth, the glowing center of every peasant home. The fire's low crackle offered comfort, light, and warmth as the outside world grew darker, colder, and quieter. This hearth was more than a source of heat. It was the heart of the home where meals were cooked, stories were whispered, and prayers were spoken. The flames danced gently on the walls, casting shadows that felt like old spirits watching over the household. Beds were not always private or soft. Children nestled beside their parents under wool blankets or furs. The wind might whistle through cracks in the wooden door. A dog might bark in the distance. Chickens rustled in the coop. But these sounds were familiar background music to medieval sleep. Most villagers followed a natural rhythm, 2 sleeps instead of 1. After sundown, the first sleep began. It lasted several hours. Around midnight, many would wake just briefly. Some prayed, some used the privy, some even visited neighbors or stoked the fire. This wakeful hour was quiet and reflective, known by some as the watching hour. Then came the second, sleep deeper, calmer. It was in this second stretch that dreams came. Medieval people believed dreams could carry divine messages or warnings. They might speak of angels, omens, or lost loved ones. Dreams were taken seriously, spoken about at breakfast, or mentioned in confession. In these humble homes, children drifted off to sleep to the sound of lullabies. Mothers sang softly, their voices worn from work, but filled with love. No instruments, just voice, hearth, and silence. Fathers sometimes told short tales before bed about saints, old wars, or fables with lessons. These stories were not dramatic or loud. They were slow, simple, and calming, meant to soothe the young mind and prepare the heart for rest above them. And as the embers glowed faintly red, the room faded into shadows. Sleep, in the medieval world, was not hurried or squeezed between distractions. It was accepted, respected, a natural gift. The body slowed, the mind softened, and the soul, for a moment, rested. Each home became a sanctuary of rest. No streetlights, no buzzing machines, just earth, fire, and the human breath in rhythm with the night. Far from the bustling villages and market towns, high on green hills or deep within forest clearings, lay the monasteries' sanctuaries of silence, prayer, and discipline. These stone-walled structures were homes not to families, but to monks, bound by routine, humility, and devotion. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light on stained glass windows, a gentle bell echoed through the monastery grounds. This was the Vespers bell, the call to evening prayer. Monks in woolen robes walked silently in single file, their sandaled feet brushing the stone floors as they entered the chapel. The prayer was slow, chanted, and serene, ancient Latin verses rising like incense into the vaulted ceiling. The echoes carried the weight of centuries, wrapping every monk in sacred sound. There was no rush, no speech beyond prayer. Books were closed in the scriptorium. Gardens were left to rest beneath the moonlight. Doors were bolted not out of fear, but to protect the stillness within. Dinner in the refectory was taken quietly. Monks ate modestly, usually bread, beans, and vegetables, with no meat except on feast days. One monk read aloud from scripture or the life of a saint, while the others listened, chewing slowly, mindful of each bite. By twilight, they filed once more through the cloisters, under arched corridors that echoed their passing. Some sat for personal reflection. Others read quietly by candlelight, their faces calm, their eyes gentle. And then came Compline, the final prayer of the day. The chapel, darker now, glowed with candlelight. The chants were softer, slower, designed not to rouse the spirit, but to ease it into rest. The last words were spoken. May the Almighty grant us a peaceful night and a perfect end. With that, each monk retreated to his cella, small room, barely large enough for a bed, a table, and a cross on the wall. Others opened to the cold night air. They lay on straw-filled mattresses, wrapped in coarse woolen blankets. No pillows, no noise, just stillness, broken only by the wind through the stone corridors, or the occasional hoot of an owl beyond the walls. For monks, sleep was not indulgence. It was preparation for prayer, for humility, for spiritual clarity. Dreams were not just passing images. They were tests of faith, whispers of the divine, or challenges from within. As they closed their eyes, they did so without fear. No debt, no war, no market to open in the morning. Only discipline, simplicity, and peace. Outside, the stars glimmered high above the cloisters. The world turned slowly, unnoticed. And within those ancient stone walls, the monastery breathed with quiet grace, each soul at rest beneath heaven's gaze, while monasteries slept in disciplined silence. Elsewhere in the medieval world, the night was not always quiet. In port towns and river-crossed villages, as the sun disappeared, another kind of life stirred under the moonlit sky. Night markets flickered to life with torches and oil lamps, Their light danced on cobblestones and wooden stalls, casting long shadows that swayed with every step. Dogs barked, children darted between legs, laughing or begging for sweets. For those working long hours, these markets were more than trade. They were a time to socialize, to meet neighbors, to gossip about taxes, harvests, or a nobleman. Scandal whispered on the wind. Musicians sometimes stood at corners with bagpipes or fiddles. Their melodies were playful, sometimes haunting, floating into alleys and drawing crowds. Storytellers, too, would appear, spinning tales of dragons, saints, or faraway wars. People sat on crates, holding clay cups of spiced ale or thin soup, their faces soft in the firelight. In some towns, guards patrolled the streets in pairs, armed with torches and clubs. They called out the hour 9 of the clock, and all is well. Their voices echoing through tight lanes and timber houses, yet not all wandered for leisure. Some were workers, returning late from mills or fields, feet sore and cloaks wet from river mist. Others were thieves, watching for carelessness. But there was beauty, too. The scent of fresh bread from midnight bakers, the echo of laughter from a tavern window, candle in a roadside shrine. They knew each curve of the road by memory. A farmer might guide his ox back from a distant pasture. A healer might carry herbs to a sick neighbor. For them, the night was familiar, not fear, just another side of life. River crossings, boatmen waited quietly. Lanterns hung at their bows, reflected in the dark water like stars scattered below. Lovers, too, found their moments here. Beneath stone bridges or in the shadows of castle ruins, young hearts met away from parents' eyes, speaking in whispers, hands brushing in the dark. And slowly, as the moon climbed higher, the town quieted. Markets closed, fires dimmed, doors locked. A half-eaten pear left on a stall. The medieval night was not just a time of sleep, with a second world, with its own rhythms, secrets, and soul. Asterisk, when sickness struck in medieval England, comfort didn't come from hospitals or pills. It came in the form of dried herbs, whispered prayers, and the steady hands of those who understood the rhythms of nature. Medicine, back then, was both a science and a belief, and much of it happened by candlelight. The village healer or wise woman often worked from a cottage that smelled of lavender, garlic, and dried mint. Bundles of herbs hung from the beams, and clay jars lined wooden shelves, seach filled with crushed leaves, flower petals, resins, and roots. The air was thick with a mix of soil, smoke, and healing. By day, they would forage along hedgerows in meadows, or deep into woods, knowing which plant eased fever, which soothed a wound, and which to never touch. But it was at night when many of these healers performed their real work. Patients arrived under cover of darkness, wrapped in cloaks, coughing or limping. A child with a fever might be wrapped in linens, soaked in chamomile. A man with aching joints would be rubbed with warm salves of mustard seed and goose fat. The healer whispered old words, half prescription, as she stirred the contents of a boiling pot. Not all believed in magic, but most respected its place beside medicine. In monastic infirmaries, monks practiced healing with quiet diligence. They followed texts copied from ancient scholars Hippocrates, Galen, along with the writings of saints. They used honey to clean wounds, wine as an antiseptic, and concoctions of thyme, sage, and vinegar to treat infections. Illness, however, was often seen as more than just a physical problem. It was spiritual, a punishment, a trial. For that reason, priests were called as often as healers. A blessing, a confession, or a last rite might bring peace to the soul if the body could not be saved. Candles flickered as poultices were applied. Rosaries clicked as patients prayed. The sick room was never truly still, breathed with pain, with hope, with whispered hymns. There were darker methods, too. Leeches applied to draw out bad blood, cupping to relieve pressure, even charms placed under pillow, symbols of protection or faith. A mother might place a rosemary sprig above her baby's cradle, believing it would ward off illness, and sometimes they watched the stars, the moon, the signs. Astrology influenced many remedies, guiding when to pick herbs or when to treat wounds. The moon is waning, they'd say. Now is the time to draw out the illness. Despite the limitations, healing wasn't hopeless. Many survived thanks to the care of those who studied the land and listened to their elders. Every salve, every tea, every chant carried generations of knowledge. And as the night deepened and the fire crackled low, the healer would rest her tools, close her book of remedies, and sit quietly beside her patient. Not every illness could be cured, but there was always comfort to be given, even if just a cool cloth on a fevered brow. As the sun dipped behind the distant hills and the golden sky gave way to indigo, the medieval home began to change. The world outside grew colder, darker, and quieter. Inside, however, a warm ritual unfolded. A small fire crackled in the hearth. Shadows danced along the wooden beams of the ceiling. The smell of smoke, baked bread, and animal skin filled the room. With no electricity, no clocks, and no rush, time slowed down. This was not a world of schedules and alarms. Nightfall came when it came, and the evening, though dim, was rich with its own rhythm. Candles were precious, often made from tallow-rendered animal fat. They smoked and sputtered as they burned. Wealthier households used beeswax, cleaner and sweet-smelling, but many families relied only on the flicker of fire and moonlight. Every flame was guarded, every spark respected. The family gathered around the hearth not just for warmth, but for connection. Here, generations sat together. Grandparents shared a stool with grandchildren. Husbands mended tools. Wives spun wool or patched clothing. Children leaned into their elders' laps, wide-eyed. And then came the voice of the storyteller. In every village, in every household, the one who could weave words into magic. They told tales of heroes and monsters, of distant lands and hidden treasures. Stories weren't just for fun. They were a thread to the past, a lesson for the future. They carried morals, history, humor, and comfort. Some stories warned of greedy kings and deceitful merchants. Others celebrated love that defied war or poverty. Many were rooted in religion, miracles, saints, and divine justice. Some were pure imagination, passed down through generations like prized possessions. Even the poorest households had tales. When the story ended, silence filled the room. Not emptiness, but absorption. Eyes fluttered, heads nodded, and children were gently lifted to straw beds or sleeping mats. Not every night was peaceful. Rain leaked through thatched roofs. Wind howled through cracks in the walls. Rodents scurried beneath the floor. Just people, stories, and firelight. In noble households, the rituals were more formal readings from manuscripts, quiet prayers in Latin, or the performance of music on a lute or harp. Yet even there, the purpose was the same: to slow down, to draw close, to rest. For the medieval mind, darkness wasn't feared, it was understood. It marked a sacred turning point, a time when the body quieted and the soul listened. The flames would burn low, the final logs turned to embers, and one by one the family drifted into sleep. With the fires dimmed and the household wrapped in silence, the medieval night gave birth to something even more mysterious: the dream world. Unlike today, where dreams are often dismissed or forgotten, in medieval Europe, dreams were taken seriously. Their straw mattresses, cloaks wrapped around them. The real journey was just beginning. In the quiet hours of the night, minds drifted beyond stone walls and timber frames. People believed they could see the future in dreams. They feared nightmares as omens. Some even thought they could be visited by angels or demons. Religious texts spoke of dreams as a holy pathway. Many saints were guided by visions in their sleep. Nightmares, which they believed were caused by spirits, witches, or creatures called mare, from which we get the word nightmare. These dark visitors would sit on a sleeper's chest, suffocating them, causing paralyzing fear. Today, we might call it sleep paralysis. They said prayers before sleep. Some carried herbs like lavender, sage, or mugwort to ward off evil spirits. Even the act of sleeping facing east was thought to invite better dreams, since it aligned the body toward Jerusalem. Dreams also reflected the medieval mind's daily world. Farmers often dreamt of their animals or fields. Soldiers dreamed of battles or weapons. Private, intense, perhaps even shameful. In monasteries, monks recorded their dreams and analyzed them in the light of scripture. Though often frightened by shadows or strange sounds at night, they clung to bedtime prayers. "Now I lay me down to sleep," or local versions of it, asking for protection through the dark hours. It was believed that the devil worked hardest at night, whispering lies into sleeping ears. That's why morning prayers were crucial to cleanse the heart and reset the soul before the sun rose again. But not every dream was heavy. Some were comforting. A father might dream of his daughter's wedding. A widow might see her husband smiling. A young boy might dream of flying above the castle walls. These moments, rare and gentle, offered a type of peace that the waking world often couldn't. As dawn approached, the veil between dream and reality thinned. The first rooster's call, the distant clanging of a church bell, or the soft creak of floorboards signaled the end of sleep. Eyes fluttered open. The cold returned, and the mind slowly left the dream behind. But in quiet moments, just before rising, people sometimes whispered their dreams aloud, to themselves, to their families, or, in the case of something especially strange, to the local priest. For, in medieval times, a dream was never just a dream. As the village lights faded and hearths settled into warm embers, not all sounds vanished with the sun. In some corners of medieval England, the night whispered melodies, quiet, gentle, almost sacred. These were the sounds of a different kind of life, one shaped not by work or war, but by music under moonlight. Though medieval life was hard, music still found its place, even in the dark. For some, it was a lullaby. For others, a spiritual ritual. And for many, it was a way to cope with sorrow, fear, or longing. In monasteries, as night hours passed and bells marked the vigils or matins, chants filled the cold stone halls. Gregorian chants, slow flowing, solemn, rose like smoke from candles. These weren't performances, they were prayers wrapped in melody. The lute, the harp, the psaltery, soft enough not to disturb, but sweet enough to soothe. These weren't grand concerts. These were quiet moments, someone playing for their child, a wife humming to herself while spinning thread, or a shepherd strumming alone under the stars in noble courts. The night brought another kind of music, refined, elegant, sometimes haunting. Troubadours and minstrels told stories through songs. These songs weren't just for entertainment, they were a way to preserve memory, to pass stories from one ear to the next. Some songs were lullabies, simple, repetitive, designed to slow the mind and soften the heart. Bye, Lully, Lully, a famous medieval lullaby, gentle as breath. Mothers sang them in small cottages with dirt floors and thatched roofs, rocking their babies wrapped in wool. Music at night also served as protection. In many rural beliefs, singing or humming quietly during the dark hours was thought to ward off spirits or prevent the evil eye from creeping in. Just as prayers guarded the soul, so did melody guard the heart. But not all night music was calm. During celebrations or feast nights, the sounds of joy would continue long past sunset. Sometimes, a fire would crackle in the center. These events were rare but unforgettable. They reminded people that life, even in hardship, had room for rhythm and joy. For the sick or dying, music played an even deeper role. Gentle melodies were sung near bedsides, believed to ease the passage from life into the next world. Songs about angels, mercy, and peace accompanied the soul as it slipped into silence, and sometimes music was imagined. A soldier in a dark, cold tent might recall the song his mother once sang. A widow might hum the wedding tune once played for her and her husband. As the night deepened, the melodies of medieval night were not grand, but they were real, soaked in meaning, memory, and magic. When night arrived and work gave way to rest, the people of medieval England turned to their beds, not grand, not luxurious, but familiar and, in their own way, comforting. Though the medieval world was harsh and unrelenting, the act of sleep was sacred, even cherished. Let's explore how people truly found warmth beyond fire in their beds, blankets, and nightly rituals for the wealthy. Sleep came in elaborate four-poster beds draped with heavy curtains. These weren't just for display. Curtains kept in warmth and blocked drafts from the cold stone walls. The mattress was stuffed with feathers or wool, laid atop a wooden or rope frame. Silk sheets, rare. Instead, they used linen or wool, often coarsely woven but softened over time with use. For the common folk, the bed was humbler but no less important. It could be a simple straw mattress laid directly on the floor or raised on a wooden frame. Families often shared a single bed door, slept side by side on mats near the fire. Warmth came not just from blankets but from shared body heat. Children slept close to parents. Grandparents tucked under the same covers. Privacy was a luxury most couldn't afford. Blankets were made from wool, thick and rough, but incredibly warm. In colder months, people piled on extra layers, animal skins, old cloaks, even sacks stuffed with hay. Some villagers used hot stones, heated by the hearth and wrapped in cloth, placed under the blanket to warm the bed before entering it. Pillows weren't common for peasants. Some used folded cloth, while others rested their heads directly on their arms or a rolled-up tunic. The rich had embroidered cushions, sometimes filled with goose down. Before sleep, certain customs were practiced. Hands were washed. A quick prayer was whispered. Children were told simple stories, often moral, sometimes mystical. Bedtime wasn't noisy or chaotic. It was ritualized and slow, like winding down a lantern. The house darkened gradually, and silence became its own lullaby. Many villagers placed protective items near the bed. A small cross carved into the wall. A bundle of herbs, like lavender or rosemary, hung nearby, believed to keep evil spirits away. Others traced a holy symbol above the door or window, marking the room safe for slumber. Some wealthier households used bed warmers' metal pans filled with hot embers from the fire, carefully slid between the sheets before sleep. They warmed the mattress, though they required caution to avoid setting the bed aflame. People slept in shifts. The idea of one long, uninterrupted sleep was uncommon. They'd lie down after dusk, rise for an hour or two during the night, and sleep again until dawn. This midnight waking was often used for prayer, quiet talk, or tending animals. Even the soundscape of sleep was different. There was no buzzing electricity, no distant car engines. Instead, the night was filled with the soft sound of wind through thatch, distant owls calling, the crackle of a dying fire, and the steady breathing of loved ones nearby. For many, the bed was the only moment of stillness in a chaotic world, a place where the body could rest and the mind could roam into dreams, memories, and hopes. It wasn't comfort in a modern sense, but it was comfort in context, simple, functional, sacred. And when sleep did come, it came deep, earned through hard work, and honored as a gift from above. As darkness blanketed the villages and towns of medieval England, the world didn't simply fall asleep, stepped into a realm ruled by superstition, dreams, and unseen forces. For people of the Middle Ages, night was more than just the absence of light. It was a spiritual threshold, a time when the veil between the known and unknown thinned. In these quiet hours, dreams were never just random images. They were believed to be messages, sometimes from God, sometimes from spirits, ancestors, or even demons. A good dream-a-vision of light, an angel, or a peaceful meadow was thought to be a divine sign. It meant protection, blessings, or guidance. But a dream of falling, drowning, or a black dog, that was a warning, a sign to be cautious, to pray, to confess sins. The uneducated peasant and the learned monk alike tried to interpret their dreams, and many believed in keeping track of them. Some would wake in the middle of the night, whispering their dream aloud, hoping the words would carry away the danger or preserve the blessing. Sleepwalking was viewed with suspicion. To walk during sleep was to move without the soul leaving the body, open to demonic influence. If someone was caught sleepwalking, others would speak prayers over them or gently guide them back to bed, avoiding sudden shocks, which were believed to trap evil spirits inside. It was also common for people to believe in nightmares as actual attacks. The word nightmare itself comes from mare, an old term for a demon or evil spirit that sat on the chest of the sleeping, pressing the air out of their lungs. Many who experienced night terrors believed a dark entity had visited them. To prevent this, garlic might be hung by the bed, iron placed under the pillow, or protective symbols drawn with chalk on the wooden bed frame. Children, especially, were believed to be vulnerable at night. Mothers would place blessed objects or small holy relics near infants to protect them from fairies or spirits that might attempt to swap them, a superstition known as changelings. These were thought to be fairy children left in place of stolen human babies. If a child cried too much or looked different, some believed it had been taken and replaced. The moon had a powerful place in medieval minds. A full moon could bring madness, hence the word lunatic, derived from luna, the Latin word for moon. Many avoided looking directly at it too long. Others believed certain herbs harvested under the moonlight held stronger magical properties. Even the direction one slept mattered. To sleep with your head facing west was considered unlucky. The dead were buried with their heads to the west and feet to the east. So to mirror that in sleep was to tempt fate or even invite death. Some families said a prayer not just for peace, but specifically to ward off evil that might walk during the night. The phrase from ghosts and goblins, "Lord deliver us," wasn't just poetic, it was heartfelt. Night was when the world of the unseen came closest. For monks and the deeply religious, this time was sacred. They often woke during the night for vigils, a specific hour of prayer practiced between midnight and dawn. These moments were not just discipline, they were spiritual protection, a light in the darkness. And so the people slept with one eye closed and the other, spiritually speaking, wide open. They believed deeply that the world didn't pause during sleep. It just shifted. Asterisk, in a time before books were common, before radios hummed or screens glowed, the night was not filled with silence, it echoed with stories. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the day's labors ended, families and neighbors would gather close to the hearth. The fire's gentle crackling became a background melody to tales passed down from generation to generation. In these nightly gatherings, storytelling was more than entertainment. It was memory, it was warning, it was wisdom. A grandfather might recount the battles of old kings. A mother might speak of spirits in the forest. Children sat wide-eyed, their imaginations alight, drawing pictures in their minds more vivid than any painting. The stories were not always grand. Many were simple tales of animals, peasants, saints, and tricksters. A fox outwitting a foolish farmer. A poor boy who helped a stranger and became blessed. These narratives taught moral lessons, kindness, honesty, courage, humility. They reminded listeners that even the smallest person could shape their fate. But as the night grew deeper, the tales often turned darker. Whispered legends of the Black Hound of the Moors, a creature with burning red eyes that prowled the countryside, or the wandering spirit of a woman who died unjustly, seeking peace she could never find. These were cautionary tales, warning children to obey their parents, or to never wander off alone after dusk. Not all storytellers were family. Sometimes a traveler, perhaps a wandering monk or peddler, would be invited to share a tale in exchange for food and shelter. These guests brought new voices, new myths, and news of distant lands. A tale from Normandy, a fable from the Holy Land, a miracle said to have occurred in the next village. The storyteller held a place of honor. To be one who carried tales was to carry power, not the power of the sword, but the power of memory and imagination. Some were natural performers, changing voices for different characters, pausing for suspense, adding rhythm with hand claps, or tapping the floor with a stick. The best storytellers made even adults lean in, hanging on every word. Children would often fall asleep mid-story, their dreams shaped by the voices of their elders. A tale that began with a night might continue in the child's imagination. Whisper of an angel in a story might lead to a vision in sleep. The boundary between the spoken word and the dream was soft and porous. Storytelling was also a way to remember family history, who their ancestors were, what lands they once owned, what battles they fought. Even the poorest family claimed a tale of distant nobility or a long-lost hero in the bloodline. These stories gave identity. They were anchors in a world where change came slowly but surely. In some villages, especially on feast days, entire communities gathered for tales told by the elders or local priests. The stories would stretch deep into the night, accompanied by bread, ale, and the warm hum of shared laughter. For a people with few luxuries, these moments were a treasure. And so, as firelight danced on stone walls and smoke curled toward the thatched roofs, the people of medieval England wove their lives with words and wonder. The world outside might be dark and full of unknowns, but inside, by the hearth, stories were the stars that lit the night. Winter in medieval England arrived like a heavy curtain drawn slowly across the land. The fields froze, the rivers stiffened, and the sky turned to iron. Days were short, with the sun rising late and sinking early, casting long shadows over the village green. Yet life did not stop, simply changed. For peasants, winter was the season of patience. The harvest was long gone, and the ground was too hard to till. The tools of farming were cleaned and stored. It was not a time to plant, but to preserve, to hold on to what had been gathered months earlier. Grains were sealed tightly in sacks. Salted meats were hung from rafters. Dried fruits and root vegetables lined the shelves inside the cottages. Fires were never allowed to die. Hearths were the heart of every home, giving light, warmth, and the ability to cook what little food remained. Firewood was precious. Children were often sent into the woods to gather fallen branches, but not too far, for winter held dangers in every shadow. Clothing became layered and worn. Woolen tunics, cloaks, and hoods were passed down and patched again and again. Blankets were shared. People huddled close at night, not only for affection, but for survival. Cold air slipped in through the wooden slats and stone cracks. There were no windows with glass, only shutters to keep out the biting wind. Illness spread easily during these months. With damp, cold air and close quarters, colds, fevers, and worse took hold. There were no doctors in the modern sense, only herbs, prayers, and the care of family. It was common for monks or nuns to offer tonics or balms from nearby abbeys. But for most, the greatest protection was faith. Churches became even more important. During winter, people looked to God for endurance. The darkness of the season echoed the spiritual trials of life, and sermons reminded them that spring would come, both to the earth and the soul. Christmas, though simpler than today's celebrations, was a light in the cold, marked with candles, prayers, and modest feasts if food allowed. In the evenings, the pace of life slowed. Men repaired tools or made simple crafts. Women spun wool or embroidered cloth. Children listened to tales or carved toys from scraps of wood. The cold outside was harsh, but inside there was a rhythm of quiet persistence. Not all suffered equally. The manor lords fared better. Their halls were larger, and though still cold by today's standards, they had access to more food, thicker furs, and better-built fires. Yet even they could not escape the isolation and grayness of winter. It was a time for reading, reflection, and planning for the year ahead. Travel nearly stopped. Roads were frozen or turned to mud with winter rains. Messengers might take days instead of hours. Villages became islands of human warmth, cut off from the outside, except for rare visits from monks, hunters, or traders brave enough to journey through the frost. Still, despite its harshness, winter had its own kind of beauty. Snow would fall in soft, silent layers, blanketing the land in white. Icicles glittered like glass. The trees stood bare and regal against pale skies, and when the fire burned bright and families sat close, wrapped in shared stories and wool, there was a deep, quiet peace that came only in these months of waiting. Within the cold heart of medieval England's winter, built of stone and timber, often perched above the village or nestled within thick forests, where luxury and hardship coexisted. Inside, the hall was a single vast room, its high ceiling lost in shadow. A central hearth blazed constantly, smoke drifting upward to exit through a hole in the roof or chimney. Light came from flickering torches and candles set in iron holders along the walls. Tapestries hung to reduce the chill and display status scenes of knights, saints, or animals woven in deep reds and golds. The Lord sat upon a raised dais at the end of the hall, beneath a carved canopy or banner displaying his coat of arms. Here, decisions were made. Disputes among peasants were judged. Orders were given for the estate's labor. The steward or bailiff reported in hushed tones, and the Lord's word held the weight of law. Yet, for all this authority, he too was ruled by loyalty to his king, by the expectations of custom, and by the shifting needs of his land. Meals were a ritual of hierarchy. The Lord and his family dined first, seated at the head table with silverware and finer bread. Below them, knights, squires, and favored servants were seated according to status. All others ate separately, sometimes in adjoining rooms or kitchens. The food, though far better than what peasants received, was still seasonal: salted meats, pottages, black bread, pies filled with root vegetables, and occasionally preserved fruits. Feasting in winter was a rare but treasured event. On holidays, such as Christmas or Epiphany, the hall transformed into a place of merriment. Minstrels played lutes and flutes. Jugglers, fools, or storytellers were sometimes hired from nearby towns. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, venison, boar, or goosef. The hunt had been good. Wine flowed, spiced with cinnamon or cloves, warming the stomach and lifting spirits. These moments served a purpose. They reminded everyone of the divine order of society. The noble was God's steward. The meal was a gift from heaven. The winter, with its hunger and cold, was a test of endurance in the feast, a symbol of grace. Daily life in the hall was a blend of ceremony and survival. The lady of the manor oversaw household affairs, directed servants, and managed stores of food, cloth, and medicine. She also maintained the social graces of the estate: embroidery, reading, hosting guests. Children of noble birth learned Latin, scripture, and the art of war under tutors or chaplains, their days shaped by duty and devotion. But the hall was not impenetrable. The chill crept in through the stone walls. Illness did not spare the noble. Isolation could weigh heavily on minds. Letters from other lords or visits from abbots brought the only glimpses of a wider world. Still, through tradition and discipline, the Lord's Hall stood firm. It was not just a home, it was the pillar that held the village in place through the frost, providing protection, order, and the hope of spring as winter's chill settled deep into the bones of every man, woman, and child in the medieval English village. Survival often depended not only on warmth and food, but also on the fragile. Knowledge passed down through generations of healers and herbalists. There were no hospitals, no trained doctors roamed the countryside. What the villagers had was folk medicine, a tapestry woven from belief, observation, and ancient wisdom. At the heart of this world stood the wise woman, an elder, respected not only for her herbs, but her quiet presence in the village. She knew the language of roots and leaves, the timing of lunar cycles, and the chants passed through whispers from her grandmother's mouth to her own. Her remedies were stored in small pouches, earthen jars, and bundles hung from wooden rafters in her modest home. Coughs and winter fevers were common. The bitter draughts and damp air of thatched cottages invited chest colds that lingered. To ease this, she might brew infusions of horehound, thyme, and elderflower, steeped gently and sipped warm. Honey from local bees, rare and precious, was added not only for sweetness, but for its believed purifying powers. For sore joints and cracked skin, some tied heated stones wrapped in cloth to their limbs at night, letting the warmth ease the pain. Natural cause, it was often considered a spiritual imbalance, a curse, bad air, or divine punishment. Therefore, remedies were part physical, part spiritual. A charm might be recited over a sick child. Christ walked on earth, Christ healed the sick in his name. May this child be made whole. The sign of the cross was drawn with water over the forehead, followed by prayers murmured in candlelight. Villagers also practiced preventive care in their own way. Bundles of lavender or wormwood were hung at doors to repel illness. Resin was burned to cleanse the air. Some drank small amounts of vinegar mixed with rosemary to strengthen the blood before harsh weather arrived. More serious ailments, such as infected wounds or wasting sickness, brought desperation. Leeches might be applied to rebalance the humors. If fever rose too high, the patient might be bathed in cold river water or laid near a fire and wrapped in damp sheets. Risky practice. Blessed bread or water from a nearby monastery was often brought by a family member, a symbol of hope more than cure. Despite all hardships, there was a strong sense of community care. If a widow fell ill, neighbors would share broth or help tend her animals. During long winters, stories of miraculous recoveries were shared, giving hope and comfort even when science could not. Yet there was always fear. When remedies failed, when strange symptoms appeared, suspicions of witchcraft stirred. A healer's reputation could shift with a single death. Still, the women and men of healing continued their quiet work because they had to. In those humble cottages, beneath the smoke-stained beams and behind frost-covered windows, folk medicine kept flickering like a flame-fragile, ancient, and essential to the village's survival. Asterisk, in a medieval English village, life did not flow by weeks or months. As we mark them today, it moved according to the church calendar, a sacred rhythm that wove the villagers' daily lives into a pattern of prayer, penance, and celebration. The bells from the local church tower didn't just call the faithful, they ordered time itself. Each day was tied to a saint, a holy feast, or a season of spiritual significance. Time was not secular, it was sacred. The year opened with Candlemas on February 2nd, marking the end of winter's darkest hold. Villagers brought candles to church to be blessed, then took them home to ward off illness and misfortune. Light, both symbolic and literal, was seen as a shield against the creeping fears of the cold months. Lent was a solemn and hungry stretch. For 40 days before Easter, villagers fasted. Meat, dairy, and sometimes eggs were forbidden. Meals became humble pottage without fat, bread without butter. Yet in this hardship was meaning. Lent reminded all of Christ's suffering. It was a time of reflection, humility, and spiritual renewal. Easter then burst forth with joy. The fast broke. Tables once again bore meat, and laughter returned to the village. Easter eggs, symbolic of resurrection and new life, were sometimes dyed or decorated using local plants and minerals. Children played, families gathered, and the church was filled with songs of hope. WHITSUN- Pentecost came 50 days after Easter. It celebrated the descent of the Holy Spirit, and for many villages, it was a time of processions. Villagers, dressed in white robes, they carried flowers and holy symbols through the streets. Dancers might perform around a maypole. Though not originally Christian, the festival was folded into the spiritual year with joy. Then came the long summer of saints. Days like St. Swithin's Day, July 15th, or St. Bartholomew's Day, August 24th, were both religious and communal. Each saint had a story, often one of martyrdom, sacrifice, or divine power, and those tales were shared at meals or during sermons, shaping moral lessons and village identity. Michaelmas in late September marked the changing of the seasons. The feast of Saint Michael, the Archangel, reminded villagers of protection against darkness, both literal and spiritual. It was also the time for hiring fairs when laborers sought new work and landowners recruited hands for the harvest. All Hallows Eve, now known as Halloween, was not about candy or costumes, but about souls. Villagers lit candles and prayed for the dead. Some believed spirits roamed that night, and small offerings of food were left for the wandering souls of the recently departed. Christmas, or Christmastide, wasn't a single day, it was 12. From December 25th to January 6th Epiphany, it was a season of warmth and generosity. Even the poor were invited to larger homes to share in meals. The Yule log burned, carols were sung, and mystery plays, dramas of biblical stories, were performed in churchyards and inns. Between these great feast days were countless lesser ones. Each was a chance to pause, reflect, and realign with God. Fasting days, feast days, saints' days, and holy days of obligation created a framework within which villagers lived. Even the plowing of a field or the slaughter of a pig was timed according to religious observance. In this way, the year became not a cycle of dates, but a pilgrimage through sacred time, reminding every man, woman, and child that their life was part of something greater, eternal, and holy. As twilight deepened and the day's work faded into silence, villagers gathered near hearths around crackling fires under low timbered ceilings to share stories passed from mouth to mouth, from one generation to the next. These were not tales for mere amusement. They were the oral soul of the village, carrying wisdom, warning, and wonder. The storyteller was often an elder, a grandmother with hands worn like leather, or an old man with eyes clouded but sharp in memory. His voice might tremble, or hers may slow, but when the tale began, the room grew still. There were stories of the green man, the spirit of the forest, cloaked in leaves and bark, protector of trees and punisher of those who took more than they needed. Children were warned not to stray too deep into the woods, lest they disturb his slumber. Others whispered about Black Shuck, a ghostly black hound with burning eyes. He prowled coastal paths and churchyards. Seeing him meant doom within a year, they said. Mothers used this tale to keep children from wandering to Ephir far after dark. The will-o'-the-wisps were flickering lights in the marshes. Folklore said they were the souls of lost travelers or trickster spirits, luring the curious to their drowning. To escape them, one must walk straight and never follow the lights. But not all tales were dark. There were heroes, two brave men who outwitted devils, clever wives who saved their families from ruin, or humble peasants who gained fortunes through kindness to strangers who later revealed themselves as saints in disguise. There were tales of giants who lived in hills, dragons curled beneath churches, and saints who healed the blind or turned rivers back with a prayer. Though no one alive had seen these things, everyone believed in the possibility. Some stories explained the world's workings, why the moon waxed and waned, why the rooster crowed, why the owl called only at night. These tales filled the gaps left by the church, giving common people a way to understand nature, time, and fate in language close to their hearts. Each region had its own legends. In Yorkshire, tales of barguests and headless horsemen roamed the wind-swept moors. In the south, chalk hills were said to be scars left by warring giants. Rivers had names older than Christianity, oaxes of Celtic gods and forgotten rites. These fireside gatherings were more than entertainment. They were memory-keeping, oral books passed through time without ink or paper. A child hearing a tale at 6 might one day repeat it at 60, word for word, voice for voice. Even during church feasts and holy days, storytelling found its place. Mystery plays reenacted biblical scenes, and traveling jesters brought fables from far lands. But the truest tales, the most cherished ones, were told quietly, in the warmth of home, long before books, television, or electricity. These legends kept imaginations alive, tying each villager to the past and reminding them that the world was still full of mystery, that under every stone and behind every breeze, something old and unseen might be watching. Asterisk, beyond the bustle of fields and markets. Behind the stone walls of monasteries, a quieter world pulsed with a very different rhythm. Here, monks, cloaked in coarse wool and silence, became the unseen keepers of time, knowledge, and spiritual discipline. Their lives moved to the bell, not to the sunrise or sunset, but to the divine hours where time was measured in prayer. Among the most sacred duties of a monk was the preservation of texts. In a candlelit scriptorium hunched over wooden desks, monks became scribes. They copied ancient works onto parchment, letter by letter, with infinite care. A single mistake could mean hours of correction or, in some cases, starting the entire page again. The ink was handmade, the quills sharpened. Daily margins were ruled with strings soaked in soot. These weren't just holy scriptures. Monks copied everything they could get: medical texts, astronomy, herbals, Greek philosophy, even Roman legal codes. They became the human printing presses of their time, keeping ancient knowledge from being lost in war, fire, or forgetfulness. Their work would one day spark the rebirth of learning we now call the Renaissance. But this copying was more than duty. It was worship. Illuminated manuscripts, those lavish texts decorated with gold leaf, rich blues from lapis lazuli, and vines curling like ivy, were acts of devotion. A single page could take weeks. The pages of these books seemed to glow in candlelight, more sacred than speech. Monks spoke little. Silence was their vow. Except during prayer or necessity, words were spared. Instead, they communicated with hand signs, with eye glances, with routine. Their minds were trained to quiet the noise of the world so they could listen to the soul. Meals were eaten in silence too, accompanied by the soft voice of one monk reading aloud from a text. Every bite of bread and cheese, every spoonful of pottage, was taken with the echo of scripture or wisdom in the air. The days were rigorous. Before dawn, the first prayers matins rang out into the cold dark. The rest of the day unfolded through lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Each had its own psalms, its own chants. The voice of prayer was the breath of the monastery. Gardens were tended for herbs. Bees were kept for wax. Simple medicines were made for local villagers who came to the doors in pain. The monks might be cloistered, but their work touched lives far beyond the walls. In famine, they shared grain. In plague, they nursed the dying. In war, they hid relics and rescued books. Not all monasteries were wealthy. Some were poor and crumbling. But even there, in the smallest cloisters, the monks lit their midnight candles and bent over vellum to keep the lamp of memory burning. These men did not seek fame. They feared pride, but unknowingly they held the keys to civilization. When you read today, or write, or speak freely when you open a book, or explore a library, you're touching something they preserved in silence, in faith, in ink and patience. In a world without electricity, without headphones or radio signals, music in the Middle Ages lived and breathed through wood, string, voice, and stone. It rose from village squares, echoed in candlelit cathedrals, and danced between the stone arches of castles. Music was not entertainment. It was memory, ritual, devotion, and joy. At the heart of medieval music was the human voice. Chanting, especially Gregorian chant, filled monasteries with haunting, ethereal melodies. These chants were sung in Latin, flowing like water, without instruments, rhythm, or harmony. They weren't composed for the ear, they were composed for the soul. The goal was spiritual elevation, not applause, but outside the cloister music took on a wilder form. In towns and courts, minstrels and troubadours carried their instruments and stories from village to village. With lutes, harps, flutes, and rebecks, they sang of chivalry, lost love, heroism, and sometimes humor. Their songs were memory scrolls, history written not on paper, but in melody. The instruments of the age were simple, yet full of texture. The hurdy-gurdy, a curious stringed instrument, turned with a crank, produced droning notes that could fill a small hall. The psaltery gave a zither-like sparkle. The bagpipe, born from reed and sheep's bladder, brought the sound of earth and fire. These sounds were raw and ancient, closer to nature than perfection. Even peasants had music. During feasts, harvest festivals, or weddings, villagers would gather, linking hands and feet in circle dances, stamping on dirt floors to drums and fiddles. No two performances were the same. Nothing was recorded. The song lived for a night and then vanished like smoke from a torch. In castles, nobles danced the estampi or the saltarello, elegant dances full of spins and steps. A court without music was unthinkable. Bards, paid in gold or bread, played for lords who sat beneath carved beams with goblets in hand. But it wasn't just sound. Medieval music was often symbolic. Each mode or scale was thought to affect the listener's mood and soul. Some music was forbidden by the church for being too joyful, too rhythmic, too sensual. Other compositions were considered tools for divine connection. Every note had a purpose, earthly or divine. In cathedrals, music reached divine heights. Polyphony, the art of many voices weaving together, began to blossom in the later Middle Ages. Choirs experimented with overlapping melodies that mimicked the harmony of angels. Composers like Hildegard of Bingen created music that still stirs modern listeners. Strange, sacred. But what's most striking is that medieval people didn't think of music as a product. It was woven into life. From the lullaby whispered to a baby, to the war cry on the battlefield, to the hymn sung at a burial, music walked beside every soul. Even as darkness fell, a shepherd might hum a tune to his flock. A widow might softly sing a prayer. The sound of the age was not loud but constant, tender, and filled with a kind of fragile eternity. Childhood in the Middle Ages was not bathed in soft pillows and toys. It was a delicate, uncertain beginning, like a candle flame trying to survive the wind. From the moment a child was born, life was already a challenge, but also a small miracle. Babies were delivered at home, attended by midwives and older women of the village. No hospitals, no sterile instruments, just experience, herbs, prayers, and hands worn by years of labor. The infant, once born, was immediately wrapped in swaddling cloth, arms bound close to its body. This wasn't for comfort, it was to straighten limbs and prevent injury. Superstition mingled with survival. The church played a major role from the first breath. Baptism often happened within days, sometimes hours. Infant mortality was high, and unbaptized souls were believed to linger in limbo. So before names, before lullabies, came holy water and whispered Latin prayers. If a child survived infancy, they entered a strange blend of freedom and responsibility. For the peasant child, Toys were rare. A carved wooden doll, a rag stuffed with straw, or a wheel pulled by string could spark wonder. But more often, their play was nature. Sticks became swords, stones became coins, puddles became oceans. Learning came by watching and doing. By age 5 or 6, children helped their parents. A girl might feed chickens, sweep the floor, or care for younger siblings. A boy might herd goats, fetch water, or turn soil with a spade half his size. These tasks weren't chores, they were life skills. Play blended with labor. Noble children had a different path. At 7, a young boy might be sent to live in another noble household as a page, beginning his training in manners, swordplay, and loyalty. Girls learned music, sewing, and prayer, preparing for life as a lady of the house. They were groomed for power and marriage, not freedom. Education was rare, but not non-existent. Village priests sometimes taught reading mostly to boys through religious texts. The alphabet was memorized through prayers. Books were treasures, handwritten and chained. 2 walls. To learn to read was to touch the sacred. Yet, even in this rough world, childhood had joy. Children sang songs while planting seeds. They raced barefoot in fields. During holidays, they dressed in flower garlands and joined dances. The church calendar offered feasts, where food was shared and laughter echoed in cold stone halls. Illness, however, was always near. Fevers came quickly, and doctors were few. A child's death was mourned deeply, though often quietly. Mothers were taught to be strong, not sentimental. But in the candlelit silence of the night, many surely whispered names into the darkness, remembering those too small to grow old. Despite the hardships, childhood in the Middle Ages was not hopeless. It was full of resilience. Each child who grew into adulthood carried with them the lessons of hardship, community, and faith. There were no photographs, no birthday parties, no schools as we know them, but there was warmth in woolen cloaks, love in shared bread, and a fierce will to live. The medieval child was not just a future worker or warrior. They were a living part of a world that valued strength, humility, and divine order. And though time has swept them away, their laughter, their fears, and their silent dreams still echo in the stones of old villages, where life once began with a cry and a prayer, asterisk in the world of medieval England. Women lived lives bound by duty, faith, and silence, but beneath those constraints, they carried quiet strength that shaped every village and castle alike. A woman's life was mapped from birth. As a girl, she was expected to help her mother, cooking, cleaning, tending animals, spinning wool. Her hands grew calloused before her voice did. There were no schools for her unless she was lucky and noble-born. Her education was found in the repetition of chores and the murmured stories of other women. Marriage wasn't a choice. It was a duty. Girls could be wed as young as 12, though most married in their mid-teens. A woman's value was measured in dowries, land alliances, and her ability to bear sons. But that was not the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a new burden. Childbirth was both sacred and dangerous. Without doctors or pain relief, women faced every labor with prayer and herbs. The room would fill with whispers, midwives offering advice, older women rubbing oils into her back. And yet, many didn't survive. Mothers passed into death, cradling new life. leaving behind husbands and children who would remember her in silence. Yet, despite these hardships, women were never weak. In farms, they ran the household. When men went to war, it was the women who managed the land, fed the animals, and defended the home. A peasant wife might rise before dawn, bake bread, milk goats, carry water, and still find time to spin wool by firelight. She was the silent engine of the village. In towns, women sold vegetables, brewed ale, and worked as midwives, healers, or weavers. Some joined guilds, passing skills down to daughters. A few even ran successful businesses, quietly earning respect. In a world that rarely said their names aloud, among the nobility, women walked a finer line. Their lives were filled with lace and Latin, but also pressure. A noblewoman might oversee an entire estate, defend a castle in her husband's absence, or advise him on alliances. She knew diplomacy masked in embroidery and power wrapped in silk. For some, the convent offered freedom. Nuns lived apart from marriage, in devotion and study. Here, they read, copied texts, and healed the sick. In stone halls lit by candlelight, their minds stretched beyond domestic life. It was a rare space where a woman could lead, teach, and grow old with peace. The church taught obedience, silence, and virtue. But women whispered strength to one another. In lullabies and herbal remedies, in shared glances and secret smiles, they created a hidden language of resilience. Their names are mostly forgotten, their faces lost to time. But every cobbled street, every worn tool, every crumbling wall once knew the touch of a woman who shaped it. She may not have worn a crown or ridden into battle, but she stood firm through war, famine, plague, and sorrow. She is the uncarved statue, the unsung hymn, the pulse beneath history's noise. And when night fell and the world grew still, her prayer was always the same, that her children would live, her family would be fed, and that God would see her heart even if no one else ever did. As dawn crept into the village and smoke curled from chimneys, one fire never slept, the blacksmith's forge. It hissed, roared, and sparked day after day, a place where iron bent to human will. In medieval England, the village smithy was more than a workplace. It was the heartbeat of progress. The blacksmith rose early, before the first rooster crowed. His hands were thick, scarred from years of hammer and tongs. His face was usually streaked with soot, his apron stiff with ash, yet he stood proud. To wield fire and shape metal was a sacred task, a blend of art and brute force. He worked in a low, open-air hut of timber and stone. The anvil sat at the center like an altar. The forge fed by coal or charcoal roared with life. Bellows pumped air into the flame, turning orange heat into white fire. This wasn't just heat, it was transformation. Villagers came with their needs. A farmer brought a broken plow. A soldier needed a new sword. A woman wanted horseshoes for her mule. The smith met them all with few words. He listened with his hands. First, he heated the iron until it glowed. Then, lifting the hammer high, he brought it down in steady, rhythmic blows. Sparks flew. The metal rang like music. Every strike had purpose. Every curve, bend, or notch was memory forged into steel. He made hinges for doors, locks for chests, hooks for kitchens. He crafted sickles to harvest grain, nails to bind timber, and tools for every trade. Without the smith, the village would stall. But his craft wasn't just practical, there was power in it. Some believed the forge held magic, that metal shaped at midnight could ward off spirits, or that a horseshoe nailed above the door brought protection. The smith, with his flame and hammer, stood between superstition and survival. He knew how to temper steel, to heat it, quench it in oil or water, and bring it back to flame. It was a careful balance. Too fast and it cracked, too slow and it softened. This delicate rhythm was not unlike life itself, pushed to the edge, cooled by struggle, made stronger through care. Apprentices watched in awe. They swept the floor, pumped the bellows, learned the names of every tool. In time, they'd take up the hammer but first came patience. The smith's wisdom wasn't taught, it was absorbed over years of sweat and flame. When his work was done, the smith would sit by the door, sipping watered ale, his arms heavy but his spirit light. Around him, children played with wooden swords, mothers passed, nodding thanks, and the village breathed easier, knowing its heart still burned at night. When the fire dimmed and the stars blinked above, the anvil cooled, but its memory lingered. The tools he shaped would harvest crops, defend homes, and build dreams. His gift was strength made real. He did not speak often. He didn't need to. His legacy was in every gate that creaked, every nail that held firm, every sword that flashed in sunlight. And when he finally passed, the village fell quiet, not for a nobleman or priest, but for the man who forged the future with fire. Beyond the bustling life of villages and marketplaces, within thick stone walls covered in creeping ivy, a different kind of work was done. In the hushed halls of a medieval monastery, silence reigned, but not idleness. Here, monks lived lives of devotion, study, and timeless preservation. The monastery was often built on a hill or nestled in a quiet forest clearing, removed from the noise of worldly affairs. Its walls were tall, its cloisters echoing only the sound of wind and sandals. The air inside smelled of candle wax, ink, parchment, and centuries of reverence. Monks rose before sunrise. Their day was ruled by bells, not by whim. The first toll brought them to morning prayer, faces lifted in candlelit chapels. Their voices, united in chant, created a harmony that reached beyond time. Gregorian melodies filled the stone air, no instruments, just the power of voice. After prayer came labor. While some worked the fields or tended sheep, others went to the scriptorium, a sacred room where the written word was both treasure and task. In the scriptorium, time moved differently. Light poured through narrow windows onto wooden desks. Feathers dipped in ink whispered across parchment. These monks were the keepers of knowledge. They copied ancient texts by hand, letter by letter, preserving wisdom from Rome, Greece, and early Christianity. A single Bible could take years to complete. Mistakes weren't erased. They were corrected with gold or marked with notes in the margin called glosses. Each page was art, illuminations, vivid illustrations of saints, dragons, and vines decorated the margins. Some letters grew into beasts, others bloomed with color. The work was meditative, reverent, and deeply human. Writing was slow, deliberate. Ink was made from oak galls and iron salts. Parchment came from stretched animal skin, scraped and polished smooth. To blot a line or smudge a word was to ruin days of labor. And yet they continued, heads bowed, hands steady. Outside the scriptorium, younger novices learned Latin, theology, and logic. They memorized scriptures, copied prayers, and were taught humility before pride, silence before speech. Discipline was firm, but not cruel. Their teachers, led by example, patient, quiet, were eaten in silence. A single monk read aloud from scripture as others ate their portion of bread, vegetables, or pottage. Speech was limited, saved for prayer and instruction. This vow of silence wasn't punishment, it was space for thought. In the evenings, monks returned to the chapel for vespers, their voices once again rising into shadow. Then they slept on straw-stuffed mattresses in cold, shared rooms, ready to begin again at dawn. While the world outside fought wars, tilled soil, or argued politics, the monks preserved history. Without them, countless texts, poems, laws, sciences have been lost. Their quiet hands carried knowledge across centuries. They asked for no fame. They lived for no wealth. They prayed, they studied, and they wrote. And because of them, when darkness fell on Europe, a small light remained flickering steadily in the monastery, where silence spoke the loudest. Asterisk. As the sun sets on this long journey through medieval England, let us return to the heart of what made this era more than just battles, plague, and castles. Beneath the layers of turmoil and hardship was something simpler, something deeply human, the quiet rhythm of daily life. The stars began to glimmer above the thatched rooftops of the village. Smoke drifted from chimneys, carrying the scent of firewood and warm stew. Dogs barked softly in the distance. A baby cried, then hushed as its mother sang a lullaby known only in her small corner of the world. Inside the cottages, families gathered around the hearth. Not all had tables, but all had warmth. The glow of the fire danced across wooden walls, casting gentle shadows on the faces of the weary. Bread was broken and shared. A bowl of broth passed from hand to hand. There was gratitude in silence, laughter in shared stories, and prayer in the heart. Children curled up under woolen blankets. They asked questions about the stars, about God, about the sounds outside their window. Parents answered gently, weaving stories passed down from their own childhood stories of giants, saints, or distant lands beyond the sea. Candles burned low, wax dripped onto rough-hewn shelves. Outside, owls called, and wind stirred the trees. A man closed his shutters. A woman rocked her infant. An old couple lay side by side, hands intertwined, hearts calm. It was the same village. It had always been timeless in its simplicity. Even in the manor house, where the walls were stone and the bedding was softer, the pattern was familiar. A squire helped his lord out of his boots. A servant banked the fire. The lady of the house read from a psalter. The lord sipped warm mead, and they too, in the quiet, knew the comfort of night. In monasteries, monks completed their final prayers, bowed heads and tired hands lifted one last time before rest. In the fields, the wind swept through rows of sleeping barley. In the forests, deer stood alert under moonlight, and overhead, the stars watched, all seeing, ever still. Midnight came softly. No bells, no fanfare, just breath, heartbeat, and dreams. Life in medieval England was not easy, but it was full. It was lived in rhythm with the seasons, in harmony with nature, and with a deep sense of place. Community mattered. Faith endured. And though the world was smaller, Its meaning was rich. So, as you drift into sleep, let this gentle echo of the past lull your mind. The footsteps on old paths, the crackle of firewood, the whisper of parchment, the hush of prayer, they are not lost. They remain alive in memory, alive in story. Close your eyes now. Let the medieval night wrap around you like a warm cloak. You are safe, you are still. And in this dream, you walk softly through a simpler time. Good night.